Evelyn Harper is about to visit her estranged son in New York, but what begins as a simple trip turns into a life-altering journey. Raised in a small southern town with deeply ingrained beliefs, Evelyn's worldview is shattered after an unexpected conversation with a stranger on her flight. As she reunites with her son, old fears and prejudices rise to the surface, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths. Will Evelyn find the courage to embrace change and rebuild the connection with her son, or will the weight of the past hold her back? Intrigued? Hit the subscribe button and comment on your thoughts. What do you think happens next? Evelyn Harper stood in the middle of the bustling terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, feeling an unfamiliar unease wash over her. She had traveled before, but today, something felt different, heavier somehow. The air in the airport hummed with activity, a whirlwind of people hurrying from gate to gate, dragging suitcases behind them like echoes of their busy lives. But for Evelyn, it was as if time had slowed down, and every step forward felt deliberate, as though she were being propelled towards something inevitable. She clutched her plane ticket in one hand and adjusted the strap of her travel bag with the other, glancing up at the departure screens. Gate B12, it read, like a beacon calling her toward a journey she wasn't entirely prepared for. In her mind, she replayed the conversation she'd had with her brother the night before. "Evelyn, people aren't what they used to be," her brother had said, his voice carrying that familiar southern drawl that was as much a part of their family as their Sunday dinners. "New York City is a whole different world. You'd better be ready for it." Evelyn had brushed him off at the time, dismissing his warning as the same old rhetoric she'd heard all her life. They'd both grown up in a small southern town, steeped in tradition and unspoken rules about how the world worked. But now, as she stood in the airport surrounded by a sea of strangers, she wondered if there wasn't a sliver of truth in his words. At 52, Evelyn had spent most of her life in that small town, where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a predictable pace. She liked that about home. It was steady, unchanging. But her son, Jack, had left that world behind years ago, drawn to the bright lights of New York and the fast-moving rhythm of the city. Evelyn had been happy for him at first. He was doing well in his career in tech, and he seemed content, but over the years the distance between them had grown, not just geographically but emotionally. Their conversations were shorter, more awkward. Visits home was rare, and now, heading to New York for the first time to visit him, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted irreversibly. She had chosen a modest blue dress for the flight, with simple flats that reminded her of the comfort of home. Her silver-streaked hair was tucked neatly behind her ears, a reflection of the careful way she approached the world. Everything in its place, everything controlled. But today, that control felt tenuous. Evelyn checked her ticket for what felt like the 100th time, ensuring that her seat, 17A, was still there waiting for her. She was early as usual, a habit from years of punctuality ingrained in her by her parents. Her mother, Claire, had always been strict about being on time. "Punctuality shows respect," Claire had said more times than Evelyn could count. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. The airport was a stark contrast to the world she knew. People from every background hurried past, their voices blending into a cacophony of languages and accents. There was something exhilarating about it, but also overwhelming. Evelyn was used to her world being small, familiar. The diversity of the city was already pressing in on her, and she hadn't even boarded the plane yet. "Now, boarding rows 20 to 30, crackled the voice over the intercom. Evelyn shifted her weight from one foot to the other, feeling the prickling discomfort rise again. She wasn't afraid of flying, at least she hadn't been in the past, but today felt different. Maybe it was the conversation with her brother, or maybe it was the weight of the upcoming visit to see Jack. She wasn't sure. All she knew was that the familiar sense of control she usually carried with her felt just out of reach. Her boarding group was next. She gathered her things, took another glance around the crowded terminal, and made her way toward the gate. Her heart raced as she neared the boarding line, surrounded by people who looked nothing like the folks from home. Here, she was a stranger, just another face in the crowd. As she moved forward in line, Evelyn couldn't help but think about Jack. He had always been different, even as a child, curious, eager to see the world beyond their small town. She had tried to give him the best life she could, instilling in him the values she'd been raised with. But as he grew older, he began to pull away, searching for something more than the life she had built for him. That was when the distance had started. She had always been proud of him, of course. He was successful, independent, but she couldn't deny the pang of loneliness that had grown in her heart over the years. As if with each new experience he had in New York, he was slipping further away from the boy she had raised. Now boarding rows 10 to 20. That was her cue. Evelyn tightened her grip on her boarding pass and took a step forward. The line moved steadily toward the gate, and soon she found herself handing her ticket to the agent. She gave a polite smile, though her heart was pounding in her chest. As the agent scanned her ticket, Evelyn glanced at the passengers in front of her, people of all ages, races, and backgrounds, all heading to New York just like her. But unlike them, Evelyn felt as though she was carrying the weight of a lifetime of unspoken expectations on her shoulders. The jet bridge stretched out ahead of her, and she took a deep breath as she stepped onto it, the sound of her flats tapping lightly against the metal floor. The walk to the plane felt longer than it should have, as if every step was leading her closer to something she wasn't entirely prepared for. Finally, she reached the door of the plane, where the flight attendant stood smiling, welcoming passengers on board. Evelyn returned their smiles with a nod, then made her way down the narrow aisle toward her seat. The plane was already crowded, and she could feel her pulse quicken as she glanced at the numbers on the overhead compartments, searching for 17A. When she reached her row, her heart sank. Sitting in the aisle seat, reading a thick hardcover book, was a man who immediately stood out to her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers. His skin was a deep, rich brown, a striking contrast to the sea of faces around him. Evelyn's stomach twisted with discomfort. She didn't know why, but something about the situation made her uneasy. Maybe it was his size, or the fact that she had never sat so close to someone who looked like him before. Back home, her life had been so homogeneous. People who looked like this man weren't a part of her everyday experience. For a moment, she stood frozen in the aisle, her gaze flicking toward the empty window seat beside him. 17A. Her seat. Her heart raced, and she found herself scanning the cabin, hoping for an empty seat elsewhere. But there were none. The flight was nearly full. She swallowed hard, then caught the eye of a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me," Evelyn said in a hushed voice as though she were sharing a secret. "Is there any chance I could switch seats?" The flight attendant, a young woman with kind eyes, checked her tablet quickly before shaking her head with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the flight is fully booked." Evelyn nodded, her mouth set in a tight line. She had no other choice. With a slight tremble in her hand, she clutched the strap of her bag and slid into the window seat beside the man. Her body tensed, and she could feel the discomfort radiating through her, though she couldn't place exactly why. The man glanced up from his book, his expression neutral. He acknowledged her with a polite nod before returning to his reading, completely unbothered by her presence. Evelyn, on the other hand, felt as though every second stretched into an eternity. She stared out the window, trying to focus on anything but the man beside her, but her mind was a jumble of thoughts, memories, and unspoken rules that had governed her life for as long as she could remember. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Stick to what you know, Evelyn. The world's changing, and not always for the better." But now, here she was, seated next to a man who represented everything that felt unfamiliar, and there was no escape for the next few hours. The engines roared to life, and the plane began its slow crawl toward the runway. As the aircraft gathered speed, Evelyn tightened her grip on the armrest, the tension in her body building with each passing second. This was going to be a long flight. The low hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin as Evelyn stared blankly out the window, watching the ground disappear beneath a blanket of clouds. The world outside grew smaller with every second, yet inside, Evelyn felt her thoughts swelling like a storm on the horizon, gathering speed and intensity. She couldn't shake the tension coiling inside her, a discomfort she hadn't expected to feel so sharply. It wasn't the plane or the act of flying that unnerved her. It was the man sitting beside her, Daniel Parker. Though he had done nothing to warrant her unease, there was something about his presence that stirred feelings Evelyn hadn't confronted in years. She hated admitting that to herself. She didn't like to think of herself as prejudiced or narrow-minded. After all, she had raised her son to be respectful, to treat everyone equally. But now, seated next to Daniel, Evelyn couldn't help but realize just how sheltered her life had been. She stole a glance at him out of the corner of her eye, careful not to let her gaze linger too long. Daniel seemed utterly engrossed in the thick book resting on his lap, a hardbound tome with the title Global Economic Shifts printed in bold on the cover. His posture was relaxed, one hand holding the book, the other resting lightly on his knee. Every now and then, he would turn a page with a fluid movement, his attention never wavering from the text in front of him. He exuded calmness as though the world outside this plane held no power over him. Evelyn shifted in her seat, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She hadn't expected to feel this way, hadn't expected her stomach to twist with discomfort simply because of who her seatmate was. But here she was, her body tense, her thoughts racing, struggling to make sense of emotions she wasn't prepared to face. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" The question came softly, catching Evelyn off guard. She blinked and turned her head to find Daniel looking at her, his dark eyes filled with quiet concern. His voice had a deep, steady timbre, and his expression was gentle, like he was trying to put her at ease without pressing too much. "Oh." Evelyn felt a sudden rush of embarrassment. She realized she had been fidgeting for the past several minutes, making her discomfort more obvious than she intended. "I'm fine, just not a big fan of flying, I guess." Daniel gave her a small, understanding smile. "I can relate. Long flights can be uncomfortable, but if it helps, the view above the clouds is usually worth it." He gestured toward the window, his tone casual and friendly. Evelyn nodded absently and glanced out the window again. The clouds had settled into a soft white blanket below the plane, with the sun casting a warm golden glow over everything. It was a beautiful sight, she supposed, but it did little to ease the churning in her stomach. "You travel often?" she asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. Daniel nodded, closing his book with a soft thud and setting it on his lap. "Quite a bit, yes. Work keeps me on the move. I'm headed to New York for a conference this time." "What kind of work do you do?" Evelyn asked, feeling the tug of polite conversation even though part of her wanted to retreat into her own thoughts. "I'm a consultant, mostly for international development projects. I work with organizations to help improve economic conditions in underserved communities." Evelyn blinked, surprised by the depth of his answer. "That sounds important." Daniel shrugged modestly. "It can be rewarding, though it's not without its challenges. There's a lot of work to be done in parts of the world where even basic necessities are hard to come by. It definitely changes your perspective on things." His words lingered in the air between them, and Evelyn felt a sudden pang of guilt. Here she was, sitting next to a man who had dedicated his career to helping others, people in places far removed from her own small-town life. And all she could think about was her own discomfort, her own narrow world. She hadn't even asked his name yet. "I'm Evelyn, by the way," she said, her voice softer now, as if trying to make up for her earlier hesitation. Daniel's smile widened, his expression warm. "Nice to meet you, Evelyn. I'm Daniel." There it was. His name. A simple introduction, yet it felt like a step across an invisible line she had drawn in her mind the moment she'd sat down beside him. Saying his name made him more real, more human. Not just a stranger or a symbol of her unease, but a person with a life, a story just like hers. "What about you?" Daniel asked, his tone conversational. "Business or pleasure?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of her answer. Why was this so hard? It was just a simple question, but it was tied to so much more. Her relationship with her son, her struggle to understand the life he had chosen, the growing gap between them. "Family," she said finally. "I'm visiting my son. He lives in New York." "Ah, family time," Daniel said, nodding. "That's always nice. How often do you get to see him?" Evelyn shifted uncomfortably, her fingers playing with the edge of her cardigan. "Not as often as I'd like. He's busy with his work and, well, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, and Evelyn felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Why had she said that? Daniel didn't press her, though. He simply nodded as if he understood without needing more details. It can be tough, can't it, when family grows apart? The sincerity in his voice caught Evelyn off guard, and for a moment she found herself wondering about Daniel's own family. Did he have children? A wife? Parents who had shaped his values as hers had shaped hers? She wanted to ask, but the question felt too personal, too intrusive. Instead, she nodded, her thoughts swirling in 1,000 different directions. The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt contemplative, like a pause in the conversation that gave both of them space to think. As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign clicked off, Evelyn sank deeper into her seat, letting her mind drift. Her thoughts wandered back to her childhood, to the lessons her mother had taught her, lessons she had never questioned until now. "You've got to hold on to what's right, Evelyn," her mother had said, her voice firm but loving. "The world's changing, and not all of it is for the better. But you can keep your head on straight if you remember where you come from." Her mother had been the backbone of their family, the keeper of their traditions, the one who made sure Evelyn and her siblings knew the difference between right and wrong. Evelyn had always admired her mother's strength, her conviction. But now, sitting on this plane, she wondered if those convictions had been too rigid, too narrow. She had grown up in a world where people stuck to their own. It wasn't an explicit rule. No one had ever told her to avoid people who looked different from her. But it was implied in the way life was lived. The lines between us and them were drawn subtly, through actions and choices, not words. Her father, a man of few emotions but strong opinions, had always emphasized the importance of sticking to what you know. And Evelyn had taken those lessons to heart, never questioning them because, in her small world, they had never been challenged. But now here she was, sitting next to a man who represented everything outside the boundaries of her upbringing. And he was kind, respectful, patient. None of the things her father had warned her about when he'd cautioned her against straying too far from her roots. The thought hit her like a wave, and Evelyn felt the sting of guilt rise in her chest. She had spent her entire life avoiding the unfamiliar, clinging to the safety of what she knew. And now she was beginning to wonder if that safety had been a kind of prison, keeping her from seeing the world as it really was. Daniel was still reading, his focus unwavering, and Evelyn couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions, admiration, curiosity, and shame. She had judged him before they had even exchanged a word, and now she was realizing just how much of her life had been shaped by those quiet, unspoken judgments. The flight attendants began moving down the aisle with their carts, the sound of clinking drink cans and the low murmur of passengers placing their orders filling the cabin. Daniel glanced up from his book and leaned slightly toward the aisle, waiting for his turn. "Just water, thanks," he said when the flight attendant reached them. Evelyn watched him closely, taking in the small details, the way he spoke with calm authority, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. He didn't fit any of the assumptions she had unconsciously made about him, and that realization made her uncomfortable. When the flight attendant turned to her, Evelyn ordered a ginger ale, her voice quieter than usual. She felt the tension in her chest again, the discomfort of confronting her own biases, the weight of her upbringing pressing down on her. For a while they sat in silence, sipping their drinks and listening to the ambient noise of the plane. But just as Evelyn began to relax, Daniel spoke again, his voice soft yet direct. "You know, I've always loved flying," he said, staring out the window. "There's something about being above the clouds that puts everything into perspective. Down on the ground, things seem bigger than they really are. Work stress, everyday worries, even our differences. But up here, it all feels smaller, like none of it matters as much as we think it does." Evelyn blinked, startled by the sudden shift in conversation. His words struck a chord deep within her, but she wasn't sure she was ready to face what they might mean for her. "Perspective," she echoed, more out of politeness than genuine curiosity. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I always find that flying helps me see things more clearly. It reminds me that we're all part of something bigger, and that our individual lives, while important, are just small pieces of a much larger puzzle." Evelyn swallowed hard, his words sinking deep into her mind. She had spent her entire life living within the boundaries of her small town, surrounded by people who looked like her, thought like her, and lived like her. But now, seated beside Daniel, she felt those boundaries begin to crack. Her mind raced with questions she wasn't ready to ask, emotions she wasn't ready to confront. But as the plane continued its journey through the sky, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. This flight was only the beginning of something much larger than a trip to New York. The plane hummed along smoothly as Evelyn sat rigidly in her seat, her ginger ale now half finished in the cup holder. The gentle murmur of passengers around her had faded into the background, but her thoughts continued to whirl. It was as though her mind had slipped into a kind of turbulence, the familiar rhythm of her beliefs thrown off course by her conversation with Daniel. He had gone back to reading, the thick hardcover still resting in his lap, though now he occasionally made notes on a sleek tablet beside him. His focus was so sharp, so confident, that it unnerved Evelyn. In her small-town world, where everyone knew everyone, there was rarely such a display of intellectual poise, especially from someone who looked like Daniel. She felt another pang of guilt for thinking that way, but the thought lingered. Evelyn turned her gaze toward the window, hoping to find some peace in the clouds, but instead she found herself thinking about her parents again. Her father's stern voice echoed in her mind. "There's a right way and a wrong way to do things, Evelyn. Stick to the right way and you'll be fine." Those words had been a mantra throughout her childhood, something she'd carried with her into adulthood. But now, she wasn't so sure that the right way was as clear-cut as she had once believed. For a moment, she closed her eyes, allowing herself to slip into a memory she hadn't thought about in years. She was 9, sitting in the back seat of her father's old station wagon as they drove into town. It was a warm summer day, and the windows were rolled down, the humid air blowing through her hair. They were headed to the grocery store, a routine trip her father had taken her on since she was little. It was their time together, just the two of them. As they pulled into the parking lot, Evelyn noticed a black family walking into the store. The mother was holding the hand of a little girl about Evelyn's age, and the father was carrying a basket of groceries. Evelyn watched them curiously, but her father's voice pulled her attention away. "We'll wait a minute," her father said, his voice low but firm. "Let them go first. No need to get mixed up in anything." Evelyn had nodded, not fully understanding at the time what her father meant, but she had learned, through moments like that, to follow his lead, to keep her distance from certain people, even if she didn't understand why. It wasn't something that had ever been spoken aloud in their home, but the message had been clear enough. Now, as she sat thousands of feet above the ground, Evelyn felt the weight of those unspoken lessons pressing down on her. She had never considered herself to be someone who held prejudices, but the truth was harder to deny now. Her discomfort with Daniel had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the invisible walls her father had built around her, walls she had carried with her well into adulthood. She opened her eyes and glanced at Daniel again. He was still reading, oblivious to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She wondered if he had ever faced people like her before, people who judged him without even realizing it. Her stomach twisted at thought. She didn't want to be that person. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead, and Evelyn's attention was pulled back to the present as the flight attendants began moving down the aisle again, this time preparing for turbulence. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a bit of turbulence up ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Evelyn's heart raced as she buckled her seatbelt, the click of the metal lock echoing in her ears. The plane started to jostle slightly, a gentle rocking at first, but then the movement became more pronounced. The hum of conversation around her quieted, and she could feel the tension in the cabin rising as passengers braced for the turbulence. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the armrest, her mind flashing back to the memory of her father's station wagon again. She had been taught to hold on tightly to the things she knew, to the people she trusted, and now, for the first time, she realized that she had been holding on too tightly, to the wrong things. The plane jolted suddenly, and Evelyn let out a small gasp, her heart pounding in her chest. Beside her, Daniel glanced over, his brow furrowed with concern. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm despite the turbulence. Evelyn nodded quickly, trying to steady her breathing. "I'm fine, just not great with turbulence." Daniel smiled reassuringly, his hands resting calmly on his lap. "It'll pass. It always does." She envied his composure, the way he seemed unfazed by the plane's sudden movements. For a moment she considered what it must be like to live in his shoes, to navigate a world where people made assumptions about him the way she had, without even realizing they were doing it. How did he stay so calm, so confident? How did he navigate the turbulence of other people's prejudices? The plane jolted again, and Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, focusing on her breathing. She needed to let go of these thoughts, but they wouldn't leave her alone. What kind of person was she? She had spent her life believing that she was kind, that she treated everyone fairly. But now, she wasn't so sure. Was her discomfort with Daniel really about him? Or was it about her own fear of stepping outside the boundaries of her upbringing? The turbulence began to ease after a few minutes, and the plane leveled off again. Evelyn opened her eyes. Her breathing finally slowed as the tension in her body started to release. But even as the plane steadied, her mind remained in turmoil. Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. The turbulence outside might have passed, but the turbulence within her was still raging. She glanced at Daniel again, and this time she felt a surge of determination. If she was going to confront her own biases, she needed to start somewhere. She turned to him, her voice tentative but sincere. "Daniel, I wanted to say something. She paused, trying to find the right words. I've realized something about myself on this flight, and I'm not sure I like what it says about me." Daniel looked at her, his expression open but patient. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. How could she explain? How could she admit to him that she had spent years living in a world that had quietly, but effectively, shaped her views of people like him? She wanted to find the right words, but everything felt inadequate. "I think—" She hesitated again, her fingers trembling slightly. "I think I've spent my life avoiding people like you, without even realizing it. And now, sitting here with you, I see how wrong that is." Daniel's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt her. He simply waited, giving her the space she needed to continue. Evelyn swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I was raised to believe that we should stick to our own. My parents never said it outright, but it was there. It was in the way they lived, the way they taught me to live. I thought I was doing the right thing by holding on to those lessons, but now I see that those lessons were wrong." Her confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat as she realized just how much weight those words carried. She had never said them aloud before, had never allowed herself to admit that the values she had grown up with might be flawed. Daniel was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "It takes a lot of courage to confront the things we've been taught, especially when they've been ingrained in us for so long." Evelyn felt her chest tighten, but it wasn't the same kind of discomfort she had felt earlier. This was different. This was the ache of recognizing something she had been blind to for so long. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't realize how much I was carrying with me." Daniel shook his head, his expression kind. "You don't need to apologize to me, Evelyn. The fact that you're willing to acknowledge it is already a big step. Most people never even get that far." Evelyn blinked, surprised by his response. She had expected him to be angry, to reject her apology, but instead, he was offering her grace. A grace she didn't feel she deserved. "It's a process," Daniel continued. "We all have things to unlearn, myself included." Evelyn stared at him, her heart heavy but also strangely lightened by his words. She had never thought of it that way, a process of unlearning. But now it made sense. She had spent her entire life learning how to see the world in a certain way, and now she needed to unlearn those lessons. It wouldn't be easy, but she could already feel the shift happening inside her. For the first time since the flight began, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, a journey toward seeing the world and the people in it with fresh eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Daniel smiled, and it was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. "We're all in this together, Evelyn." The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket of understanding, and for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt like she wasn't carrying that weight alone. As the flight continued, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the conversation she'd just had with Daniel. It had been raw, painful even, but it was also liberating in a way she hadn't expected. She had spent her life clinging to the values her parents had instilled in her, but now she was starting to see that those values were too limited for the world she was living in. She glanced out the window again, watching as the clouds rolled beneath them. It felt symbolic in a way, like she was finally starting to see the bigger picture, the world beyond her small town, beyond her narrow upbringing. Daniel had been nothing but kind to her, patient and understanding in a way she didn't deserve. and that kindness made her realize just how much she had been missing out on by living within the walls of her own biases. She had judged him before even speaking to him, and now she saw how wrong that judgment had been. The plane began its slow descent into New York, and Evelyn felt her heart race again, but this time it wasn't from anxiety. It was from something else, something that felt like hope. As they landed, Evelyn realized that this trip wasn't just about visiting her son. It was about something much bigger, about confronting the things she had avoided for so long, about facing the parts of herself she had never wanted to see. And maybe, just maybe, it was about finding a way to let go of the past and embrace the future. The plane touched down smoothly at LaGuardia Airport, but Evelyn's heart was anything but steady. As she gathered her belongings and stepped into the bustling terminal, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She was about to see Jack, her son, for the first time in nearly a year. Her conversation with Daniel had left her feeling raw and exposed, as if the thin veneer of certainty she had carried with her all these years had been peeled away. She had spent the entire flight wrestling with her thoughts, trying to come to terms with the biases she hadn't even known she held. But now, standing in the middle of New York City, she wasn't just confronting her own discomfort. She was about to face Jack and everything that had driven them apart over the years. Evelyn tugged her suitcase behind her, weaving through the crowds of travelers with a sense of growing anxiety. The noise and chaos of the city surrounded her, but her mind was somewhere else, lost in the chasm that had opened up between her and her son. Jack had always been different from her, even as a child. He had questioned things she had never thought to question, challenged the world in ways that made her uncomfortable. And when he had left for New York, it had felt like he was leaving more than just their small town behind. He was leaving her behind, too. She hadn't realized how deep the hurt had gone until now. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She fumbled to retrieve it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the message from Jack. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Are you here? Do you need a ride?" Evelyn stared at the message for a moment, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. She could sense the formality in his words, the careful distance they both maintained. Jack wasn't the same boy who had grown up under her roof, and she wasn't sure if she knew how to bridge the gap between them anymore. Taking a deep breath, she typed out a quick reply. "Yes, I'm here. I'll grab a cab and head to your apartment." After hitting send, Evelyn walked outside to hail a taxi, the cool New York air biting at her skin. She hadn't been in a city this large in years, and the noise and motion felt overwhelming. Yellow cabs sped by, horns blaring, and people rushed past her, their lives moving at a pace Evelyn wasn't used to. She finally managed to flag down a cab, and as she slid into the back seat, she gave the driver Jack's address in Manhattan. The car merged into the chaotic traffic, and Evelyn found herself staring out the window, watching the towering skyscrapers blur by. New York was a world apart from the quiet, familiar streets of her hometown. It was noisy, fast, unpredictable. No wonder Jack loved it here, she thought with a mix of awe and unease. This city mirrored the changes that had happened inside him, the changes she had never fully understood. As the cab wove through the maze of streets, Evelyn's mind drifted back to Jack as a boy. She remembered how he had always been so curious, always asking questions about the world beyond their small town. She had tried to answer him as best she could, but there were some things she hadn't known how to explain, things she hadn't been taught to question herself. Jack had gone off to college in New York and had never looked back. He had thrived in the city, building a career, making new friends, and embracing a world that was so different from the one she had known. Evelyn had tried to be supportive, but deep down, she had struggled with the changes in him, the progressive ideas, the open-mindedness that had felt like a rejection of the values she had raised him with. She had been proud of his success, but at the same time, she had felt left behind, unable to keep up with the person he had become. Now, as the cab neared Jack's apartment, Evelyn felt her stomach twist with anxiety. How could she explain everything she had been feeling? How could she tell him about the realization she had come to on the flight? The realization that her discomfort with him, with his world, was as much about her own limitations as it was about anything he had done. The cab pulled up in front of a sleek, modern apartment building, and Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the kind of place she had imagined her son living. It was all glass and steel, towering above the street with an air of quiet sophistication. It looked so alien to her, so far removed from the home she had raised him in. She paid the driver, grabbed her suitcase, and stepped out onto the sidewalk, feeling dwarfed by the massive buildings around her. She stared up at the apartment, trying to steady her nerves. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading. A few moments later, the doors to the apartment building slid open and Jack stepped out, looking every bit the part of a New Yorker. He was taller than she remembered, lean and sharp-featured, with a casual jacket and jeans that made him look both effortlessly stylish and completely at ease in the chaos of the city. His hair was tousled in that way that suggested he hadn't spent much time thinking about it, but it suited him. "Mom," Jack said, a small smile playing on his lips as he approached her. "Jack," Evelyn replied, her voice catching in her throat. For a moment they stood there, unsure of what to say. The last time they had seen each other, their conversation had been strained, full of awkward silences and surface-level pleasantries. Evelyn had hoped this time would be different, but standing here now, she wasn't so sure. Jack stepped forward and pulled her into a hug, and though it was brief, it was sincere. Evelyn felt a rush of emotion that she hadn't expected, a longing for the closeness they had once shared before life had gotten in the way, before their differences had driven them apart. "I'm glad you made it," Jack said as he pulled back, giving her a quick once-over. "You look good." Evelyn forced a smile, though her heart was racing. There was so much she wanted to say, but she couldn't find the words. How could she explain what had been stirring inside her since the flight? How could she tell him that she was starting to see the world differently, but that she wasn't sure how to navigate it? "I'm glad to be here," she said finally, her voice a little too quiet. "It's been a while." Jack nodded, though there was a tension in his expression that told Evelyn he felt the same awkwardness she did. "Yeah, it has, but we'll make the most of it. Come on, I'll help you with your bag." As they walked inside the building, Evelyn couldn't help but feel like an outsider. Everything about this place felt foreign to her. The sleek, modern design, the fast pace of the people moving through the lobby, the quiet hum of the elevators. It was a far cry from the cozy, cluttered house she had built back in her hometown. The elevator ride up to Jack's apartment was silent, the air thick with unspoken words. Evelyn wanted to reach out, to tell him about the flight, about Daniel, about the things she was just beginning to understand, but the words stuck in her throat, heavy with years of silence. When they reached Jack's apartment, Evelyn was struck by how modern and minimalist it was. The open floor plan, sleek furniture, and muted color palette were nothing like the home she had known. There were no family photos on the walls, no knickknacks or heirlooms, just a single abstract painting that Evelyn didn't understand. It was all so stark, so different from the warm, lived-in feeling of the house she had raised him in. Jack set her suitcase down by the door and gestured toward the living room. "You can make yourself comfortable. I'll set you up in the guest room in a bit." Evelyn nodded, taking a seat on the couch. The cushions were firm, the fabric smooth and cold against her skin. She felt out of place, like she didn't belong in this world Jack had created for himself. The distance between them was palpable, not just physically, but emotionally. Jack sat across from her, leaning back in his chair with casual ease that only seemed to heighten the tension in the room. He was trying to make this feel normal, but Evelyn could see the unease in his eyes. "How was your flight?" he asked, breaking the silence. Evelyn hesitated, unsure of how much to say. "It was interesting," she replied. "I had a conversation with someone that, well, it got me thinking." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Oh? About what?" Evelyn swallowed, feeling the weight of the conversation she had shared with Daniel pressing on her chest. She wanted to open up to Jack, to tell him everything, but the words felt too big, too complicated. How could she explain all the realizations she had come to on the flight? How could she tell him that she was beginning to see how small her world had been, and how much she had held on to ideas that no longer fit? "About change, I guess," Evelyn said slowly. "About how the world is different from what I've always known." Jack's expression softened slightly, but there was still a guardedness in his eyes. "It is different, Mom. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing." Evelyn nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I know. I think I'm starting to see that. But it's hard. I've spent so long holding on to certain things, ideas, beliefs, and I'm just now realizing that maybe I've been wrong about a lot of them." There was a long pause, and for the first time Evelyn saw a flicker of something like understanding in Jack's eyes. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "What kind of things, Mom? What are you talking about?" Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her confession building inside her. She had spent years avoiding conversations like this, years pushing down the questions she hadn't wanted to ask. But now, after the flight, after Daniel, she couldn't ignore it anymore. "I think I've been afraid, Jack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of change, afraid of people I don't understand, and because of that, I've been afraid of you." Jack's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. He simply waited, his expression softening as he listened. Evelyn's hands trembled in her lap. "When you left for New York, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't understand why you wanted to leave. I thought you were rejecting everything I had given you, everything I had raised you to believe in, and I've spent so long holding on to that hurt that I didn't see that maybe I was the one who needed to change." Her confession hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, and for a moment, Evelyn felt like she had just peeled back a layer of herself. She had never shown anyone, not even Jack. Jack's expression softened even further, and he leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. "Mom." He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "I never left because I didn't love you. I left because I needed to find my own way. I needed to figure out who I was, and New York gave me that chance." Evelyn nodded, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I see that now. I didn't want to lose you, Jack. And I think I tried to hold on too tightly." Jack stood up and crossed the room, sitting beside her on the couch. He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "You didn't lose me, Mom. You never did. I've always been here. But I needed you to see me for who I am now, not who I was when I left." Evelyn blinked back tears, her heart swelling with emotion. "I'm trying, Jack. I really am. That's all I've ever wanted," Jack said softly. They sat in silence for a while, the tension between them easing with each passing moment. It wasn't perfect. There were still years of misunderstandings and hurt to work through, but for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt like they were finally seeing each other. The distance between them was still there, but it didn't feel insurmountable anymore. As the evening wore on, they talked more about Jack's work, his life in New York, and the things that had changed since they had last seen each other. And though there was still so much left unsaid, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this trip was the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild the things they had lost. The next morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of distant traffic humming through the window of Jack's guest room. The light in the room was soft, diffused by the pale gray curtains, and for a moment she felt a strange sense of disorientation. This wasn't home, but neither was it the unfamiliar chaos of New York she had anticipated. It was something in between, a space that felt quiet and comfortable, even though it was far from the life she had known for so long. She stretched slowly, feeling the stiffness in her back from the long flight, and allowed her mind to wander back to the conversation she'd had with Jack the night before. It had been raw, honest, perhaps the most honest conversation they had ever had. Evelyn hadn't realized how much she had been holding back all these years, how much she had let her fear of change color her relationship with her son. Now, as the morning light filtered into the room, she felt something new, a sense of possibility. She had taken the first step toward understanding, and while she knew there was still a long way to go, she felt hopeful in a way she hadn't in years. Evelyn dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Jack already sitting at the counter, sipping a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she entered, a faint smile touching his lips. "Morning, Mom. Sleep okay?" Evelyn nodded, feeling the warmth of his greeting. "I did, actually. It's quiet here. I wasn't expecting that." Jack chuckled, setting his phone down. "Yeah, it's quieter than you'd think for New York. The building's pretty well insulated. You get used to the city noise after a while, though." Evelyn smiled softly, taking a seat across from him. She glanced out the window at the bustling street below, where people were already rushing to work, cars honking and bikes weaving through traffic. The city moved at a pace that felt foreign to her, but sitting here in Jack's apartment, she didn't feel as overwhelmed by it as she had the day before. "I was thinking about what we talked about last night," Jack said after a moment, his tone more serious now, "about change and how hard it can be. I know I haven't made it easy for you with me living here and everything." Evelyn shook her head quickly, feeling a surge of guilt. "It's not your fault, Jack. You were right, I was the one who struggled with change. I think I wasn't ready for it." Jack watched her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "You've always been open-minded, though, Mom. Even when we didn't agree, you never shut me out." Evelyn's heart tightened at his words. Had she really been that open-minded? She had always thought of herself as someone who accepted others, someone who raised her son to respect people from all walks of life. But now, after the conversation with Daniel, she wasn't so sure. "I tried," she said, her voice quieter. "But I think I've realized that I wasn't as open-minded as I thought I was. I've been holding on to a lot of things, Jack. Things I didn't even realize I was holding on to." Jack raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Like what?" Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. This was the moment she had been building towards, the moment she would have to open up fully to her son about what she had learned on the flight, about the biases she had carried with her all these years. "I met someone on the plane," she began, her voice steady but soft. "His name was Daniel. We talked for a while, and he made me realize some things about myself, about how I've been living." Jack's expression shifted, his gaze sharpening as he listened intently. Evelyn felt a wave of nerves wash over her, but she pressed on. "I think I've been carrying these old beliefs, these unspoken ideas about people without even realizing it. And when I sat next to Daniel, I felt uncomfortable, not because of anything he did, but because of the things I was afraid to confront in myself." There, She had said it. The truth that had been simmering inside her since the flight, the truth she had been afraid to face. Jack didn't say anything right away, but his eyes softened, and he leaned forward, resting his arms on the counter. "You mean, like biases?" Evelyn nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yes, I think so. I didn't want to admit it at first, but Daniel was so patient, so kind, and it made me realize how much I've been holding on to these old ideas. Ideas that I didn't even know I had." She paused, searching Jack's face for any sign of judgment, but all she saw was quiet understanding. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to finally see what he had seen all along. "It's not easy to admit that, Mom," Jack said gently, "but I'm really proud of you for being willing to look at it. Most people wouldn't." Evelyn felt a wave of relief wash over her at his words, though the emotion in her chest was still heavy. "I just wish I had done it sooner. I wish I had been more open with you, Jack. I didn't want to lose you, and I think that fear made me hold on to things that I should have let go of a long time ago." Jack's gaze softened even further, and he reached out to place a hand on hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "You didn't lose me, Mom. I've always been here. But I get it. Change is scary, and it's hard to let go of the things that have been part of you for so long." Evelyn blinked back tears, her heart full of gratitude and regret all at once. Jack's words felt like a balm to the ache she had been carrying, but they also reminded her of the distance she had created between them over the years. "I was afraid of losing you to this city, to this world I didn't understand," Evelyn admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "But now I realize that it wasn't you I was afraid of. It was me. I was afraid of changing, of letting go of everything I thought I knew." Jack squeezed her hand gently, his expression kind. "It's okay, Mom. We all have things to unlearn. The important thing is that you're willing to do it now." Evelyn smiled through her tears, feeling a sense of relief that she hadn't expected. She had been holding on to the fear of change for so long that it had felt like a part of her. But now, sitting here with Jack, she could finally see that change didn't have to be something to fear. It could be something to embrace. As the morning wore on, Evelyn and Jack continued to talk about the things that had shaped them, about the ways they had both grown since Jack had left their small town. The conversation was different from any they had had before. It was deeper, more honest, more open. Evelyn found herself listening in a way she hadn't before, really hearing what Jack was saying about his life in New York, about the challenges he had faced and the perspectives he had gained. She realized how much she had missed out on by not being more open to his experiences, by not seeing the world through his eyes. "You've changed, Jack," Evelyn said quietly at one point, her voice filled with admiration. "But I can see now that it's a good thing. You've grown into someone I'm really proud of." Jack smiled, his expression warm but modest. "Thanks, Mom, but I've had my own growing pains too. Living here hasn't always been easy. There's a lot about this city that I had to adjust to, but it's made me stronger, and I'm grateful for that." Evelyn nodded, feeling a sense of pride swell in her chest. For so long she had focused on what she had lost when Jack left, but now she could see what he had gained, and what she had the potential to gain if she let herself embrace the change she had been resisting for so long. "I think I'm starting to understand why you love it here," Evelyn said, glancing out the window at the busy street below. "There's so much life here, so many different kinds of people. It's overwhelming, but it's also exciting." Jack grinned, his eyes brightening. "Yeah, that's one of the things I love about it. There's always something new to learn, always a new perspective to see. It keeps you on your toes." Evelyn smiled back, feeling a sense of connection with her son that she hadn't felt in years. It was as though they were finally seeing each other, not just as mother and son, but as two people who had both struggled with change in their own ways, and who were both still learning how to navigate it. As the afternoon wore on, Jack suggested they take a walk through the city. Evelyn hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to face the hustle and bustle of New York, but Jack's enthusiasm was contagious. He led her through the streets, pointing out his favorite spots, sharing stories about the people he had met and the places he had come to love. For the first time, Evelyn didn't feel like an outsider in Jack's world. She felt like she was part of it, even if only for a little while. They wandered through Central Park, the trees just beginning to change color as autumn settled in. The air was crisp, and Evelyn felt a sense of peace as they walked in comfortable silence, the noise of the city fading into the background. At one point, Jack stopped and turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Mom, I've always loved this park. It's like a little piece of calm in the middle of the chaos. It reminds me that even when things are crazy, there's always a place to find some peace." Evelyn smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle over her like a blanket. Maybe that was what she needed too, a place of peace in the middle of all the change. "I think I've been looking for that too," she said softly. "A place where I can feel like myself again, even if everything else is changing." Jack nodded, his expression warm. "You'll find it, Mom. I know you will." As they continued their walk through the park, Evelyn felt a sense of hope rising within her. The world was changing, and she was changing with it, but for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. That evening, as they sat together in Jack's apartment, Evelyn felt a sense of calm that she hadn't felt in a long time. The fear, the discomfort, the resistance she had carried with her for so long, it was all starting to fade, replaced by something softer, something that felt like acceptance. "I'm proud of you, Jack," Evelyn said quietly as they sat together, the city lights twinkling outside the window. "Not just for the life you've built here, but for the person you've become. I see you now, and I'm proud of you." Jack smiled, his eyes filled with emotion. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot to me." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their words settling over them. It wasn't perfect. There were still things to work through, still conversations to be had, but for the first time in years, Evelyn felt like they were on the same page. They were moving forward together, not apart. As the night wore on, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken over the past few days. The conversation with Daniel had been the catalyst, the spark that had ignited the change within her. But it was her relationship with Jack that had shown her what that change could really mean. It wasn't just about letting go of old beliefs. It was about embracing the unknown, about being willing to see the world through new eyes. And as she sat there, the city buzzing with life outside, Evelyn realized that she was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, Evelyn woke with a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in years. The air in Jack's apartment was cool and crisp, and as she lay in bed, listening to the faint sounds of the city waking up outside, she felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, hope, and the lingering echoes of the fear she had carried with her for so long. But for the first time, that fear didn't feel like an insurmountable wall. It felt like something she could overcome. She dressed quickly, eager to start the day, and as she made her way to the kitchen, she found Jack already there, making coffee. He looked up as she entered, and there was something different in his expression. A warmth, a sense of ease that hadn't been there before. It was as if the distance between them had finally begun to close. "Morning, Mom," Jack said with a smile, handing her a cup of coffee. "You sleep okay?" Evelyn nodded, taking the cup gratefully. I did. Better than I expected, actually. She sipped the coffee, savoring its warmth. The air between them felt lighter today, as though the tension that had hung over their relationship for years had finally started to lift. Jack leaned against the counter, watching her with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," he said after a moment. "About change, and how we've both had to deal with it in different ways. I know it hasn't been easy for you, but I really appreciate that you're trying, Mom. It means a lot to me." Evelyn felt a swell of emotion at his words. It hadn't been easy. None of this had been. But hearing Jack acknowledge her efforts made it all feel worth it. "I've been thinking about it too," she said quietly, "about how much I've held on to things without even realizing it. It's been hard, but I think I'm finally ready to let go." Jack's eyes softened, and he reached out to place a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "That's all I've ever wanted, Mom. For you to be open to seeing things differently. We don't have to agree on everything, but I just want you to understand where I'm coming from." Evelyn nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent so many years clinging to the way things had always been, to the world she had known, without realizing how much it had cost her. But now, as she stood here with Jack, she could see that the world was so much bigger, so much more complex than she had ever allowed herself to believe. "I think I'm starting to understand that now," she said softly. "And I want to keep learning. I don't want to be afraid anymore." Jack smiled, his eyes filled with pride and warmth. "You don't have to be, Mom. You're doing great. And I'm here to help you whatever you need." Evelyn felt a surge of gratitude for her son, for his patience, his kindness, and his willingness to meet her where she was, even when she had struggled to meet him halfway. She had spent so long fearing that she was losing him, but now she realized that she had never really lost him at all. Jack had always been there, waiting for her to catch up. As they sat together, sipping their coffee in the quiet of the morning, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. The fear that had once gripped her so tightly was starting to loosen its hold, replaced by a sense of openness, of possibility. She wasn't the same person she had been when she boarded that flight to New York. She was changing, slowly but surely, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what that change might bring. Later that day, Jack suggested they spend the afternoon exploring more of the city. At first, Evelyn hesitated, feeling the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. New York was still overwhelming to her, its noise, its crowds, its relentless energy. But after everything she had been through in the past few days, she felt ready to face it. She wanted to see the world through Jack's eyes, to understand why he had chosen this life, this city, as his home. They set off in the late morning, walking through the busy streets of Manhattan. Jack led the way, pointing out his favorite spots, coffee shops, bookstores, parks, all while sharing stories about the people he had met and the experiences that had shaped him. Evelyn listened intently, feeling a growing sense of pride in her son. He had built a life here, one that was rich with meaning and purpose, and she could finally see that now. As they wandered through the city, Evelyn found herself struck by the diversity of the people around them. There were people from every walk of life, from every background and culture, all moving together in the same chaotic, vibrant rhythm. It was so different from the homogeneity of her small town, where everyone looked and thought the same way. Here, it felt like the world was wide open, filled with endless possibilities. They stopped for lunch at a small cafe, and as they sat by the window, watching the world go by, Evelyn couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Just days ago, she had boarded a plane filled with fear and uncertainty, clinging to the beliefs she had carried with her for so long. But now she felt like she was starting to shed those old layers, like she was finally beginning to see the world and herself more clearly. "What do you think of the city so far?" Jack asked, taking a sip of his drink as he glanced at her with curiosity. Evelyn smiled, her heart light. "It's a lot to take in, but I think I'm starting to get it. There's so much here, so many different kinds of people, so much life. It's a little overwhelming, but I can see why you love it." Jack's smile widened, and he nodded. "That's what I love about it. It's always changing, always moving. It keeps you on your toes, but it also keeps you open to new things." Evelyn nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep within her. Maybe that was the key, staying open to new things, to new experiences, to new ways of seeing the world. For so long she had kept herself closed off, afraid of what she didn't understand. But now, sitting here with her son, she realized that being open didn't mean losing herself. It meant growing, evolving, and becoming more than she had ever imagined. "I think I needed to come here," Evelyn said quietly, her gaze drifting to the bustling street outside. "Not just to see you, but to see this. To see the world outside my little bubble. I've spent so much of my life afraid of change, but now I think I'm ready for it." Jack's eyes softened, and he reached across the table to take her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "I'm glad you're here, Mom. I've always wanted to share this with you." Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat, but this time it wasn't from fear or regret. It was from the deep, overwhelming sense of love and connection she felt with her son. They had come so far, and though there were still things to work through, she knew they were on the right path. That evening, after they returned to Jack's apartment, they sat together in the living room, the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the windows. The noise of the city had faded into the background, and there was a sense of calm between them that hadn't been there before. It was as though they had finally found their way back to each other after years of misunderstanding and hurt. "I've been thinking a lot about what Daniel said on the plane," Evelyn said after a long stretch of silence. "About how life is too short to carry so much weight. I think I've been carrying so much too much for so long, and it's time to let it go." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We all carry things we don't realize, Mom. But the fact that you're ready to let it go, that's huge." Evelyn smiled, feeling the weight in her chest begin to ease. "I think I'm finally ready to start letting go of the past, to stop holding on to the things that don't serve me anymore." Jack squeezed her hand gently, his eyes filled with pride and understanding. "You've already started, Mom. You've come so far in just a few days, and I know you're going to keep growing." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from the deep sense of gratitude she felt for the journey she had taken, for the chance to reconnect with Jack, to confront her own fears, and to open herself up to a world she had once been so afraid of. As they sat together in the quiet of Jack's apartment, Evelyn felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from things staying the same. It was the kind of peace that came from embracing the unknown, from being willing to face the future with open eyes and an open heart. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt like she was ready for whatever came next. The next day, Evelyn packed her bags and prepared to head back to the airport. Jack offered to drive her, and as they made their way through the busy streets of New York, Evelyn felt a sense of closure settling over her. This trip had been more than just a visit to see her son. It had been the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter where she was no longer afraid of change. As they pulled up to the terminal, Jack turned to her, his expression filled with warmth. "Thanks for coming, Mom. I know it wasn't easy for you, but I'm really glad you came." Evelyn smiled, feeling a swell of emotion in her chest. "I'm glad I came too, Jack. It's been eye-opening." They hugged tightly, and for the first time, Evelyn didn't feel the distance between them. She felt connected to her son, in a way she hadn't in years, and she knew that this connection would only grow stronger as they continued to move forward together. As she boarded the plane and took her seat, Evelyn looked out the window, watching as the city disappeared beneath the clouds. She thought about everything that had happened over the past few days. Her conversation with Daniel, her reconnection with Jack, and the growth she had experienced within herself. The world was changing, and so was she, and for the first time she wasn't afraid of it. As the plane soared into the sky, Evelyn felt a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She was ready to embrace the unknown, to face the future with an open heart and an open mind. And as the clouds rolled beneath her, Evelyn smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning of her journey towards something new, something better. Thank you for reading Evelyn's story of growth and self-discovery. If you enjoyed this journey and want to experience more stories that explore the human experience, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below to stay updated with future content.